Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Everyone ready? Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to introduce the jury of the branding and packaging design category. I'm just going to run through who's on stage, and then I think each judge has a piece of work that they want to talk about. So here we go. I have Ava Yaza of the Yaza Twins, Astrid Savro of Collins, Chris Siren, Sarah Moffat of Turner Duckworth, and Hiren Dadia of Diageo. But maybe you want to each jump up and talk about the work that you've chosen, and also tell us a bit about how how you came to the judging, your kind of background as well. Ava, you're first.
Hi, I'm Eva Yarza. I'm from Yarza Twins. I think for my accent you can tell I'm Spanish. But I've been here in London for a few years. I have my ex-boss there from when I was a junior designer, and my ex-course director when I was studying in Centro San Martins, probably someone else around as well. So I chose the Good Cup because I thought this is the future of packaging. It's a very simple project, not about the logo type of the graphic elements, it's more about the shape of the cup itself. It's just avoiding plastics, so it's completely recyclable, it's wasting like much less than any other alternatives in the market. And we thought this could be translated to mainstream kind of McDonald's or Burger King, and we really thought it was valuable from a structure point of view. We also test in the jury the cup to make sure it's not leaking, and it's not leaking. It's like really awesome. It's just one piece. We just thought it was excellent.
Thank you. Okay, Astrid, would you like to talk about your choice?
Sure. So I chose. Can you see the screen with me in the middle? Yeah. This feels like a silent disco.
Yeah.
We might just change channel and surprise you all. So I chose the Ian's Institute of Infinite Curiosity, right? And because it ticks all the boxes. It's a great idea. It's beautifully executed, and it's fit for purpose. So I don't know if you'll see an animation now with a letter E that moves, and it's an E transformed, a lowercase letter E transformed into an I, and this bit here moves around as in, because it's curious, like infinitely curious, which really represents what, the spirit of Charles and Ray Eames and everything they did, and it reflects the playfulness of that, and it just couldn't be, it just ticks all the boxes. It's kind of one of those things, and the first, it rose to the top quite soon. I remember the first time I saw it, I thought, oh man, I wish I'd done that, and it's that kind of project that we're looking for, right, as judges, I guess, across all categories.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to talk about your choice?
Yes, I chose Leibniz biscuits, and I picked this because I think it had a lot of the right elements that are involved in a rebrand without pushing things a bit too far. One conversation we had about this category in general is sometimes the discrepancy between using certain techniques in design and not really having a reason for it at times. In this case, some details I liked about Leibniz is even the use of ink traps in their updated word mark. Ink traps was ridiculously popular this round of judging, but I think in this case it had a nice reason to tie back to their brand, which is in the crinkles of the biscuit itself. And the fact that there's a lot of playful elements that still make sense, kind of like a banana tripping on a banana peel for their fruit snacks, or hiding the registration mark behind the biscuits. There's a lot of little playful elements that I think the more you kind of spend time with it, the more you realize it was a very solid improvement in their brand.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hi, yeah, I chose the Graza olive oil. Hopefully I'm not butchering the pronunciation. But I think what was super exciting for this for me is the fact that I began in packaging and I really appreciate packaging. And this gives you permission to use what they claim to be Michelin-starred oil, not necessarily an everyday that you'd normally see priced up, made more luxurious, with all the bells and whistles, but it put it into a simple plastic bottle that gave you permission to squeeze it on whatever you wanted. and it has this beautiful language around it that I think they've struck a brilliant balance of it feeling very modern, very of the time, very contemporary, yet it still communicates this sort of gloopy olive oil-like nature through the lettering, through the illustration style, and it just brings a bit of joy and a little less snobbery back into the kitchen in a way that's just, I really enjoyed it, a bit of fun, and it's also something, before I saw it here, that I've enjoyed as a consumer as well, so being able to kind of see it once just from a consumer's point of view, and then to be able to look at it and discuss it with everybody from a design and technique point of view has been really super interesting.
Thank you. Hiran?
44% of over 65-year-olds claim that their favourite pastime is having sex.
So I think I chose this project was only because if you look at the subject itself, right, could have been taken into such a serious way of interpreting to just educate, but I think they did it in such a sophisticated, very culturally relevant way, and I think the other thing was, right, it was not just about delivering something which was just unidimensional, but it's just the crafting of the typography, the name, the illustration, the copy. Everything is so seamlessly tied to each other. And the little details, right? Every single time you look at the pack and you start seeing smaller details to it, and it just brings a smile, to your face. And like Astrid was saying, right, it ticks all the boxes. Is it inspiring? Yes, it is. Is it, delivered in an impactful way? Absolutely. And is it fit for purpose? Absolutely. And it's one piece, right, where I feel like I wish I would have done it. So it just stood out.
Thank you so much, all. Didn't think I would see Richard Madeley pop up there today. I was like, but thank you so much. Yeah, so you mentioned sort of, Chris, that you saw like certain things recur in the category this year. Were there like trends that you saw repeat, and what was the balance between sort of like things which you kind of felt like you'd vaguely seen before and things which were like totally original and blew you away? Can you give us an idea of like the balance in the category this year?
Yeah, I think in the nature of D&AD, and everyone knows how tough it is to really break through and work, I'd say the balance was steering more so towards techniques that didn't really work for the brand. But then when we saw moments that worked for the brand, it really stood out, and it kind of felt like a no-brainer as we looked through the work. As Astrid mentioned, like when we saw Eames, it just immediately was like on to the next round and let's keep going. So I'd say it did steer a bit on the side of more technique for technique's sake and not really finding a way to really incorporate, whether it's like an emerging technology. Some trends we were talking about is like generative art, variable typefaces, trendy typefaces. I know I mentioned ink traps. That was very popular. I think there was a lot of interest in seeing different varieties of design used, but there weren't as many things I felt was as purposeful for its reason to use it.
Yeah.
That I think, Chris, the point you made is so, and we discussed it, is so important to not use technology for the sake of using technology. And it's not that we didn't appreciate technology, but if you, for example, ink traps, Leibniz, or I don't know how to, the biscuit thing, those are really purposeful, meaningful ink traps. So if you do generative things, and there were amazing things done, with generative typography or art or whatever, but it needs to be at the service of the idea. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that really stood out, that the importance of a good idea, and then equally well executed craft. Because if you just focus on the craft and doing beautiful or moving things with no intent or no purpose or no real idea behind it, then it's not going to make it into D&AD, basically. But it's the principles of good design, right? So yeah.
And Ava, you mentioned you saw this packaging being, tested it whether it would leak, and did it stand up as a good product? And when you're talking about packaging design, it's not just looking at something and moving on. You're actually interacting with these things. You're opening them. You're feeling them. Can you talk about how you sort of judge the designs on how well the kind of visual element matched up with the experience of the packaging?
Yes, so there were many projects who were amazing. For example, in a graphic level, but maybe it wasn't like the correct materials. It was over packaging, for example. But we thought it was very important as well to think about being plastic free and how it can be taken forward to the future. We kind of set in the example what is going to be the future of packaging. So that's what we were kind of judging.
Yeah. And Sarah, I noticed that you're encouraged to drizzle with that olive oil and kind of have a chefy kind of moment. Did that sort of play in your mind when you were thinking about that project as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think with everything, what was great about judging packaging is we see a little bit of a pre-read. We see these dazzling videos that are just like, wow, it's so inspiring. But at the end of the day, when you've got the thing in your hand, does it actually deliver on that experience? I think that was really important for us to see. And there were some things that we were coming into that we were just like, oh, it's going to be amazing. And I was like, oh, that's it. And then some things that really they hadn't had the budget of production to put into putting a great entry together in terms of high production video. And when you met the piece in real life, it was really engaging and way more interesting than you'd seen. So definitely, yeah, the fit for purpose, but the true experience is putting that brand actually in your hand. So we did a lot of experimenting, lots of playing with bits of packaging. It's great.
And Hiran, what about this use of kind of the seed packet sort of guise for this condom? How did it totally surprise you, and did you kind of what was about the kind of interactiveness of that packaging sort of enticed you?
It definitely is a surprise.
Yeah.
And I think we all were discussing in terms of that sometimes it's just those small things really getting into observation and delivering it for the right consumer and that experience, right? You don't have to always go with what's new. Like this could have easily gotten into a space of saying, can we bring it alive in metaverse or through any technology, but is it fit for purpose for that consumer? Probably not. And probably it's just this consumer is still involved in a lot of things manually and doing it, and that is where the connect was real in terms of delivering for the consumer. So yeah, it was beautiful. I think the way even the condoms were stuck on those leaflets, right? They were just stunning in the way that the visuals were creating.
Yeah. I think you kind of look at them and think, I know what this is about, and then you look again and think,
exactly.
oh, hang on. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear
Sorry,
you now. Yeah.
the actual condoms were stuck on the.
Yes.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's to make that look sexy
Absolutely.
is a challenge. Wow.
And Astrid and Chris, you've chosen a branding of a newish institute and a rebranding of quite a well-known brand. Could you maybe talk about the branding and the rebranding that you saw in the category and what it kind of took to surprise you with, and what the difference is between trying to establish an identity and maybe change a perception of an existing identity? Were there other rebrands in the category and that one sort of stood out to you?
Yeah, I think overall I felt really good that successful rebrands weren't always for larger corporations. There were a lot of other categories, say for smaller businesses or even charities, where the work was very solid and strong. Even to the point where we're reading the descriptions and looking at a rebrand from a team of 40 people to a smaller rebrand from a team of 4, or even looking at a rebrand, not condoning this, where a team of a few designers were paid in fish to do the rebrand. And it's really impressive. I think sometimes I feel like as creatives, we lose the context a bit outside of the work of the meetings and the timelines and the deadlines to do things. And it's even more impressive when you realize that even on a smaller level, you can still make very solid work, even if you're getting paid in fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then and as Chris said, there were amazing rebrands in a large scale of brands, but equally in small, much smaller brands. The challenge that comes at different scales is completely different, and it's easy for us to forget. Something that's going to be seen by millions of people, and the classic question in a rebrand, is it an evolution or is it a revolution, and how much are we going to retain, how much are we going to change? In the case of Leibniz, they did an amazing, subtle job, and it's not a revolution, but it is such a perfect evolution that elevates. And sometimes, as you know, doing branding, it's not about really revolutionizing it. It's about keeping what works and making it better. So it's, you know, if it works, make it, you know, continue. You don't have to rechange it and start from scratch in large scale. And equally in smaller scale, there were lots of surprises. And for me, and the EMs thing just made me laugh. And, you know, to your point, those things that make you laugh and just bring you moments of joy, and those really, and I have a great sense of humor, and I love things, you know, that make me laugh. I loved seeing that condom thing. I wish I was a fly on the wall in all your, it's amazing work. But yeah, that kind of elevates it, and it's a plus, right? It's an added bonus. Yeah. It's like a bonus track.
Yeah, I love that there's a kind of joyfulness to a lot of these projects that you've chosen. Do you think it kind of speaks to the times that we're living in now, and we've been through this kind of, we're living in this age of complexity, and you know, a product has to exist in a digital form, in a physical form, and it just feels like a lot of the things that we connect with are actually those simple things that maybe are a little bit nostalgic, like the gardening seeds. And did you see anything in the category that sort of spoke about the times that we're living in and the culture of the image culture that we kind of exist in today?
We saw a lot of work that in packaging in particular that just kind of, it's the point of joy. I think we've all gone through so much stress and heavy things that actually as designers we've had to communicate some really heavy topics. Yeah. We've all wanted to contribute to sort of like helping causes and further causes. And I've seen a lot of that work in years leading up to this year, and what was really nice is to see these sort of daisies coming through the concrete in terms of little moments of joy and happiness that kind of remind you it's not all terrible, that there are some like really great moments to connect with. So I think there was some real sparks of that were coming through, and I think naturally, particularly on the packaging jury as well, we were really gravitating towards that work and things that sort of like spoke to making that little moment of surprise, a little moment of delight that just kind of made you feel it's not so heavy after all.
Yeah.
It's great.
Did anyone else notice that joyful thread in the work?
Yeah, and I guess in packaging, sustainability is like a major thing, right? That the cups that you showed at the beginning, joy, and but I just mentioned joy as I think one of the projects in branding that really we spoke a lot about was for a charity, Chris, that you mentioned, and it's. And that you mentioned as well is those things that for a better cause, or you know the things that kind of are not, they are the service of a brand that wants to do good, right? So this was for an Australian charity, and it was just perfect because it ticked all the boxes like the EMs did, but in a completely different context, and for a good cause that worked so well and was so effective that it's allowed this charity to actually start up and really do good, positive change in the world. And that's, I think, also one of the things that we should be looking at in general.
Yeah. And on the sustainability sort of theme, obviously with packaging, we're always, we're sort of like a bit fed up of having all this stuff in our life. And I wondered if you saw like an intent to make something so beautiful or so useful that you actually might want to keep it. Something that you might want to hold on to beyond just the initial use and get away from that kind of disposable culture that we've come to adopt?
Yeah, I think definitely saw some, it's interesting, a little bit of virtue signalling. There were some brands that kind of were sheep in wolves clothing that they would, or wolves in sheep's clothing, whichever way around it is, where they were exuding what you would think was recyclable, but at the end of the day it was just a coating, a veneer that sat on top, to some really innovative, some designs that didn't make it because the technology wasn't quite right yet. But it was interesting as a jury overall. although the criteria was about the brilliant ideas, brilliantly executed, we were coming in with a mindset of, but you have to be responsible. So even though not necessarily one of the criteria, we were all looking at things of saying, look at the additional paper, look at the additional pieces, look to see what isn't recyclable. So it's kind of interesting lens, and great to see that there's categories such as the plastic-free, the questions around making sure it's circular. So I think there were brands that were really making an effort, step in the right direction. It's a small step for some of the brands, but others were, really making strides. It was so great to see, which I think is why I ever picked the Happy Cup, because it's a change that we need to see, and we need as much exposure as we can get for people seeing that technology and bringing it into the work that they're doing, the better. The more people that adopt it, the more that we can make a change. So it's a good platform for that.
Yeah.
Just one of the watch-outs, at least as a jury, we all debated a lot on was, while sustainability is becoming really important, it's almost becoming hygiene in a way as we go into the future. What happened was a lot of brands were adopting it, but in trying to adopt it was still using so much material. So it in a way started becoming counterintuitive that yes, you're using say paper pulp or pulp which is created with waste and things like that, but the packs are so massive when it could have been smaller, more compact, still beautifully designed, crafted, all of that. So that's a watch out which we all debated a lot on.
So did we, interestingly, in branding, there was a few cases that were exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, really interesting.
Do you have some examples from the branding of how that intention got lost?
Well, it's counterintuitive. Is the mic on?
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive in the sense that in sustainability, if you're trying to get a message across, but using that thing. So say I'm saying let's get rid of cups, but I'm using cups, even if they're recyclable, millions of them to get my point across. Maybe it's not as effective. So there were one particular case which was it was beautiful, and it created a lot of debate because it ticked the boxes except on that point, which I think is a really, really important one.
Was there anything else that you disagreed on or you found lacking in this category? Is there something that you really wanted to see but didn't come through? Something you were expecting?
I wanted to see the work in every single other category across the spectrum.
No, I think in packaging, at least, one of the things which we again spoke about post the jury was, is it just sustainable or is it more responsible as a category, which also has inclusivity at the heart of it, right? Because sustainability is one aspect of it, but just being accessible and inclusive is a very, very important driver as we go into the future. And unfortunately, there wasn't anything sparking into that, realm yet. But yeah, it's something that designers and creatives should start thinking, and companies as well.
Was there any evidence of these brands trying to reach a new person? Is that what you were missing? This kind of, a person who's never engaged with this product before. Obviously, I guess with Relate, it was trying to reach a new age category. So I guess that's one act of being more inclusive. But did you kind of see any of these entries really go out of their usual target consumer?
I think for me the Gras oil, I swear I don't have shares in the company, but I think for me that they took something that's really seen as very premium and they made it very accessible, and I think that's something that was interesting to see. We moved some categories around where it was seen as in the luxury category. There was another oil that was just in the regular FMCG, but it was done with such a premium vibe that we did move that. So for us as well, I think it's hard when you're doing the entries. Do I have it in the right category? Will they see this as a luxury? Is this FMCG? Where to put it? So in that way, I think, yes, trying to reach different audiences, but for us it was hard to sort of, who are they talking to? Because we don't have the full background of everything of where it's headed. But I think that the Gras was a good example of something that's translating across a category into something much more accessible in terms of an audience, not necessarily easier to open.
Yeah. And I think you've all touched on the fact that you, by categorizing these entries, you're missing out on some element of the story. And I wondered, like, previously it might be okay to judge, you know, logo design separate to packaging design, separate to branding design, but is it a sign that actually all these things are coming together now in such a more, we actually need to treat them differently than sort of splitting them up because they're all part of the story? Maybe Astrid, you mentioned this Eames branding being dynamic and, you know, in various forms. And can you even judge something on just one piece of the story?
That's a very good point, and we were actually talking about this just before coming on stage, that there's some entries that you see and that are entered into branding, but also into packaging and also into graphic design, and the overlap between them. And some of, for example, we had a few that was also, and we knew that it was in packaging because we asked, is this in packaging as well? Because we assume it would be, right? Just to double check, because we believe that maybe the packaging should be judged in, but also how can you appreciate the craft and the detail of certain things in, for example, packaging. Of course, we're looking at it from different angles, but you do miss, oh gosh, this is like, but it depends on the criteria of each category, right?
Yeah.
So you can submit certain things in certain categories and others, and if you miss out on certain elements or because of restrictions of the awards themselves or, you know, whatever, then I think there can be a blind spot, and that blind spot can be very critical in certain aspects, as, you know, as you were mentioning before. But yeah, I don't know if I answered the question at all.
Just that, I mean, to design anything now is to not design it in isolation, right? You have to design on so many levels that actually the splitting up of the categories became a bit problematic because you were missing some of the story to be able to judge.
Yeah, but equally, I think it's really important to have those categories, because
Yeah.
something might be, one thing might be, the packaging might be amazing, the level of craft, and you would not necessarily appreciate that in branding, first of all, because we don't have the physical, in some cases, we don't have the physical pieces, right? So, because you're looking at it from a holistic perspective of the entire brand and not necessarily, you know, the level of craft that goes into a particular thing or how well it works in a particular. So it's a really good question. I think it's a complicated. Maybe we can all get together in future and judge all the categories.
That would be
make me
nice.
very happy.
We
and
would be
judge
here
them
all day.
together. No, not one day a month.
Thank you. And then I think, Ava, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, these businesses trying to do good, and, you know, this purpose-driven businesses that we're seeing. You know, every brand having to, you know, really go beyond what they're doing. That, you know, we're not just selling to people anymore. We're really trying to do something positive in the world. Did you notice that in any of the entries trying to go beyond just the brief of, you know, redesigning, you know, repackaging Leibniz, or this sense of something wider, like a bigger context beyond the design?
Yeah, so there was a really interesting project which sparked a lot of debate, and it was like a wine kind of packaging project. And it's basically, there was a flooding somewhere in Germany, and all the people were struggling a lot, and all these wineries got flooded.
Mm-hmm.
So all the kind of wineries around this area got together, got all their wasted wine, which they couldn't sell anymore. And it was like muddy bottles full of mud and really dirty. But what they did was to make a project and sell it as the flat wine. So they collected a lot of kind of money, like I think they collected like 4 million to kind of help the area, like to recover from flooding. So this was in the packaging place and our kind of jury, and it was really interesting for us because we weren't judging like the label, because it was a lot of different wine companies and it wasn't really like, it wouldn't have passed anything. But this specific project was interesting because we were judging the mud as part of the packaging. And we thought that was really interesting, and it breaks the limits. It's just communicating something as part of a campaign, and that was really brilliant in our opinion.
See, that's really interesting, because we had that same entry in, I think it's probably the same one, the wine and the dirt in branding. And it also sparked a lot of debate, and something. And how do you judge that? Do you judge that from a packaging perspective, from a tactical branding, as an activation kind of thing, or yeah, it sparked a lot of debate as well in our category.
In our jury as well, right? There was a lot of discussions and debates. Is it label or is it not a label, right? Is it packaging or not a packaging? But that's what we were trying to, come to a conclusion where there are traditional modes of packaging which we are all used to seeing. But when you see the bottle itself, right, it's still packaging with the mud being there. And, that's the challenge and the opportunity with that kind of a project, right? And it's about, finding those small opportunities in every challenges and really going beyond traditional mediums as well sometimes just helps it to stand out, create, and give back to the cause as well.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Are there any other projects that went beyond just the traditional idea of what branding or packaging should be?
I don't think this might not answer the question, but I think generally for branding, what I found to appreciate was designers making toolkits and identities a bit more accessible. I think it's improved very well from the point where you kind of develop your brand, you have your toolkit and guidelines, and there's just kind of this phase where you hand it off and you kind of hope for the best that it'll retain its original vision over time. I think what we saw in a lot of entries, even if it wasn't completely successful from a branding perspective, is how different studios and designers try to address this notion of making their vision easily able to apply across the board, whether that's something that's generative or like invariable type. I think it's kind of steering this line between, is it good as an idea or is it just more of a technique that feels trendy? But I think when that line felt appropriate, it was really nice to see designers consider how this could be applied long after the brief was finished or the original team moved on. I think sometimes, even in our end, when we look at branding, we kind of have to think like, this is for a long-term vision. You don't want this to be that project where you go online somewhere and you see that they did a rebrand a year and a half later, regardless of if it was beautiful work or not.
I think, what you just said, Chris, is so important, and we talked a lot about this particular thing and how it's not keeping the target in mind, and whether it's large scale or small scale, and is it, if you hand the brand guidelines to a place that has no designers, for example, then that are able to implement your brand guidelines, then are you actually doing an effective job beyond having a really nice case study on your website or something that goes and wins awards, right? Because it's our responsibility to actually make sure that it happens and it's implemented and that it's functional based on its context. So yeah, I think that's such a good point.
Yeah, so this kind of longevity of your design, and also maybe being able to hand it over and sort of scale back your ownership. Is that what you mean? Like sort of having the generosity to be like, this can live without me. It doesn't have to be such a my thing.
Exactly, because there are cases we saw where the work looked amazing and we'd kind of get into that nerdier phase of like breaking down what makes it so good or how is it developed. But then you kind of look at the applications as we talked about, like when you look at how that brand went to their website or how it extended in social, you start to notice discrepancies because you get the sense that while the key visual may look very well crafted, it's not something you can carry across the board. Say, in some cases, I think a lot of typography works really well when you use particular words or shorter names, like someone whose name is 12 characters versus 34. I think you still have to find that balance to consider how to make it work, and sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah. So just thinking about the future of these categories and what you might want to see if you were coming back next year or in 5 years, what do you think people who are interested in submitting an entry, what should be on their mind? Like if you could kind of like summarize from your experience this year what people should focus on in future.
Keep it simple. The first visual has to be very, very simple because we just see so, like as judges, right? So many entries in different categories, and this is just very practical for the awards themselves. But keep it simple in terms of the visuals, because as judges we have to see so much, and the idea has to come across, the execution has to come across, but without overdoing the overall thing, because it really needs to stand out from the crowd, right? And in order to do that, it's the idea and the execution as simple as possible. And that doesn't mean that the project has to be simple. It can be very complicated, but the way in which it's presented should be quick to understand.
Yeah, keep your copy to a minimum, because when you're reading, it's a lot of reading in one day on the fly.
Yeah.
So, descriptions for the entry, to the point, and keep it honest as well. I think there was quite a lot of sleuthing going on of like, is this real? Did this really happen? I think you had a lot of that on your jury too, of just making sure that you're staying on track and being as honest as possible with everything.
I think even from the side of branding, we found a couple funny moments where, you know how important it is to see the before and after of a work. There were a few instances where there was a lot more before than there was the after, or the after came not in a place where we thought it made sense as you're kind of reviewing the work. I think making sure you tell a story too, as Astrid mentioned, that's still very simple in a presentation. Sometimes I think we felt like we had to go a little more of an extra mile to make sure we're really seeing the vision that designers and creatives are bringing forward. And I think, as you mentioned too, that requires, looking at the slides, rereading the brief and the design solution. And in some cases, I think where the work was the strongest, you almost didn't need any of that. Like, you kind of start from start to finish, and you understood their process, the challenge, the before and after. Finding that balance of telling a story, even in the case of submitting work to D&AD, I think, versus, the project is finished, you have your samples together. It's not just to upload your best visuals to the submission. I think kind of put yourself in our shoes, where you imagine there's 9 of us getting cutthroat at times, and we just want to really see the sharpest interpretation of your work. I think was very important.
But it's hard, right? Because I was spoken to fellow when you're on the judging side, you think, oh, of course, this is how it has to be presented, and it's so easy for us to, on this side to see it. But then, because we're involved in our project, they're like little babies, right? And we've been working on it for such a long time, and it's really hard to be objective and to then summarize. Like, oh my God, how am I going to summarize all of this in 5 slides? It's impossible. It's a year's worth of work into 5 slides. What do I keep out and what do I keep in, and how to edit that down? If it's our own babies, haircutting that is absolutely, it's really painful. So, sometimes it helps to get someone that is not yourself to do it. To kind of, like, imagine, like I call it my mom test. Is like, would I be able to explain this to my mother on the phone in 1 sentence, or with 4 different slides? Would she get it? And that kind of frame mind, I think, is, whether it's her mom or whoever you want it to be. But I think it's a good reference.
Yeah, get your mum on board, definitely. Anybody else have any closing thoughts on how a future entrant could improve their chances of getting noticed?
I have to say, I've sneaked out from the black pencil judging, and they're waiting for me to come back.
Okay.
But I think what's been really interesting for me there is I've had the privilege of being able to see the creme de la creme in each category.
Yeah.
And actually, some people have represented their work quite differently for different juries. And I would say that I would just have a watch out of, make sure that you keep it simple, but no simpler. I think that some judges have seen additional work that's supported that may not have been entered, and gone, oh, if I'd seen that, it would have done so much better. So I think it's not that you have to attach every single aspect, but when you're thinking if it's just the logo, if it might be better supported by a fuller case study so that they understand, I definitely recommend that, because I think there's a couple of entries that may have missed out just on the way that they entered their work.
And Ava, I think you are previous D&AD winner in the packaging design category. So maybe you can talk about it from that sense of having to edit down yeah, what you present versus being so close to the project. Is there any advice you could give?
Yes, well, I think they cover most of it. Like, keep it simple. They just have like hundreds of applications they have to go through, so make sure yours gets noticed, not only by the way you write down your entry, but also how you present it. That is going to be seen like not invisible, like in a lot of kind of projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when we're students and putting our first portfolio together, there's a tendency to keep 30 projects in there and just, shooting a PDF to whoever it is, whereas it's a lot better to narrow it down to your 3, 4 best projects. And it's really similar. It's like edit it down to the 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever best slides. And, I think what you said also is really important in terms of thinking about the different, who's going to see, because we're really thorough, rigorous. I mean, D&AD is the Oscars, right, of the design industry. So we are thorough. We do our homework. We double check things. We check if it's a stunt, if it's real, if it's fake. And it's really hard. Just getting a wood pencil is like such an achievement. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much to the jury. It's been so insightful to learn about the individual projects, but also how you saw the kind of overarching themes as well. And you've also been so generous with your advice as well to our audience. So thank you, everybody. I think I think that wraps things up. Thank you so much.
And get your work in there.